Okay, wait, pause. Wait, we're recording now.
We're doing it.
Recording. Oh my,
It's live.
my first webinar.
Oh my goodness. All right. People are pouring in aggressively fast. I like it. Hello and welcome everyone to the comprehensive encyclopedia of sales plays presented by Flip the Script and of course the one and the only Becc Holland. Becc, what's going on? How are we doing today?
Gosh, I'm doing so well. I'm super nervous because of this content, but I am very, very excited. Doing well.
Me too. I've been lucky to be privy to the deck and all this stuff, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So I'm personally excited for this to get more color on it. It truly is game changing. So excited. Before we dive in, I want to do some super quick housekeeping. So for those joining us, my name is Scott Barker. I head up strategic engagement at Outreach, and my job is very simple today. It's really to get out of the way mostly, make sure we stay on track for time. You know, Becc is, I would say, more than just a little bit passionate about this topic. So I think if she had her way, we'd be here until like next Sunday. So I'm going to try and keep us to an hour and a half. And then lastly, just act as the voice of you, the attendees. So if you do have any questions, we've got a lot of content to get through, but we want to, be there for the community. So please use the Q&A feature. It is at the bottom. We'll try to weave in a few as we go. And secondly, these are always a lot more fun when we know who we're rocking with. So please go to the chat feature, introduce yourself. I can see many are doing it already. Your name, your company, title, say what's up. It's always fun to see who's here. Last thing, this will be recorded. So if you have to hop off, the kids are screaming in the background, or you got a one-on-one with your manager, you got to close a deal, whatever it is, this will be in your inbox probably within about 24 hours. Share it with your friends. Let's get this in front of as many people as possible. But I think that's the boring stuff out of the way. Let's dive in. So, Becc, my first question is an icebreaker question. As everyone's piling in, we had over 1,000 people, so they're all coming in now. My question is a genuine one. Is your ability to produce mass amounts of very high quality content. I produce content, but not at the level you're able to do it like all the time. So my question is, where are you pulling inspiration from? Because a lot of this stuff is completely net new 0 to 1 ideas.
Yeah, that's a great question. So from a high level, I was under leadership essentially, and we were running things how best in practice programs were being run, and we weren't seeing the results that we wanted. And so I spent years in the tank, I would say frustrated, nervous, etc., developing theories of what I thought would help, like if I had this team and if I had the say and if I had X, Y, and Z, this is what I think would really change the game. And so I had years of that and then slowly got into the content game and then aggressively just jumped in the pool. So by the time I jumped in the pool, I think of one of my biggest influences is Billy Beane. So I don't know if anyone on the line has heard of Billy Beane, but TLDR, Billy Beane is a general manager of the Oakland A's. And essentially, yes, Justin Michael jumped in here. And me and my grandfather used to watch baseball all the time. And he was a big Oakland A's fan. And so I grew up knowing about Billy Beane. And essentially, Billy Beane reorged the system of how baseball was essentially played. I mean, before him, scouts were looking at like the net value of someone of like, okay, this is a really big name, and they were paying a lot of money for these different players. And Billy Beane was one of the first people to take what was called sabermetrics and really apply it on the field and reorg the metricing system to how he was paying for players. He was paying for players based on the players that had the likelihood of getting on base. based on box score as opposed to their big bad names. And so he reorged the entire system of how he turned baseball essentially into a science on the field. And because of that, even with a very low budget, he went on one of the longest winning streaks in MLB history with a team of absolute, like, quote unquote junk. And so, when it comes to content, like, I think that was the biggest moment for me, is when I said, like, hey, best in practice says X, Y, and Z. Best in practice says we should shoot out templates. Best in practice says we should KPI this way. Best in practice says, on and on and on and on and on. And at one point, something just snapped for me. And I'm like, this isn't getting us what we want. So I don't know necessarily, like, I'm going to flush out what I think the answer is, but I'm an inductive thinker by nature, as opposed to taking a theory and deductive thinking and applying it to someone and beta testing if it works. I flip the script, so to speak, of like, okay, Scott's a top performer. What is Scott doing differently? And how can I scale that, as an approach? And so I think those two things are what infuse a ton of passion in me of like, okay, I think this is going to work, but I'm going to be open-handed about it. So once it started working, I just aggressively started, blitzing out content, because I knew, I'm like, I have to get this in front of people. I have to show them how I'm doing what I'm doing. And so it's an unending well of, like, when I started to get traction, I'm like, if you're going to sit here, on the line, it's like, I'm rushing to publish every single thing that I knew would work. So that's kind of the background of it. But it really came from, I would say, influence wise, Billy Beane was my biggest influence, but it came from the desire to publish for people what was working for me, so that they could have it in front of them.
I like it. And tons of Moneyball fans in the house. Someone apparently watched it last night. That's a crazy connection. Shout out. I'll do some quick shout outs. We got Lori Richardson in the house.
Lori.
What's up, Lori? Evan Hales, Chris White, Jen Ferguson, Linda Sugarman, Jeremy Ross. So many awesome people joining us today. I see everyone's putting their LinkedIn. Connect with people. This is about building community and leveling up our amazing, incredible profession. Okay, Becc, last question before we get into the content. And I'm just trying to get inside your brain a little bit where these ideas come from. You recently wrote that Charles Dickens is your life manual. So my question is, what life lessons have you learned from reading Charles Dickens, which isn't in the normal, hey, you should read this sales literature?
Yeah, so two things. Dickens, he was paid per word, right? So he was very, very lengthy. And I think his strength as a writer is essentially, he leaves you at the end of a sentence. And by sentence, it looks like a paragraph, but he leaves you with the recognition of like, okay, I get what he said, but like, he could dust me. He can lose me if he wanted to. And so I'd say top two life lessons from Dickens, and I'm not your parochial, I don't study necessarily just all sales material. Like mostly I would say I study, fiction writers. Mm-hmm. However, my top two takeaways from Dickens as a writer is the depth of him as a writer. He was essentially trying to make very, very big worlds seem very, very small and relatable. So essentially, I kind of view Dickens as the social media, 100, 200 years ago. Like essentially, he was trying to prove through his plot lines. I mean, you go to like the character listings and it's like, there's a character listing at the beginning of each book. So Barnaby Rudge is my favorite book by him, but there's a character listing because there's so many people. And he was trying to prove that even though the world was really, really big, it was really, really small and it all intertwined. So I'd say that's my biggest learning from him. Second biggest one, and then we can transition. People are like, just get into the content, like, but
building the suspense. Come on.
My second biggest learning from him is he has a habit or proclivity towards, you never really know who the bad guy is or who the good guy is necessarily in his writing. And I love that because there's a dichotomy from my perspective in all of us of like, sometimes I'm going to choose to be the good guy. Sometimes I'm going to choose to be the bad guy, and it's not so black and white of like, I'm either this great person or I'm either this terrible person. I don't view it like that. I view it as like, we make a lot of decisions along the way. So I think he had a understanding of that, and his characters, in terms of complexity and also in terms of just flavors, were very balanced in the kinds of action. You were always trying to figure out until the end, like who's the heroine, who's the protagonist, and who's the antagonist in the story, which I love about him.
I like it. I like it. I often say it's never black or white. It's all just a shade of gray. And it's all a matter of perspective, really. So I love that. Okay, Miss Becc Holland, without further ado, take it away and give the people what they came for.
Okay, I will try. So thank you everyone so much for jumping on. As far as today, I would really like to, I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see it, Scott?
It is loading. Yes, I can. Perfect.
So, as Scott mentioned, but please, please, please pile in the chat. Ask any questions. Scott's going to be monitoring those and asking some questions, but the more questions that you have, the better. So my one ask is that this is going to be a very meaty webinar. My heart is racing because of how significant to me, at least, the content is, but I would love everyone's thoughts. I do not want this to be a one-way, so please pile in the chat, and ask any questions along the way, and he'll be monitoring there. But really, from a high level, I had come into market, quote unquote, on this concept of personalization at scale. And I was always thinking of like, how do I systematize this thing? How do I systematize personalization? How do I make sure that people can be relevant within that personalization, get out a certain amount of activity metric, et cetera. And it forced me into this world of starting to think about, because of that, I was leveraging sales engagement, outreach in specific of like, okay, how do I leverage sales engagement to really make this scalable? And so I started to create a number of what I would call shell sequences of like, since it's not quote unquote relevance, it's not VP of sales within fintech, okay, so what is it? Like, what is the actual sequence comprised of? And so I started to develop a number of shell sequences where I was dictating for my reps the types of actions, was this cold call, was this email, what is the actual text of that email, and how can I incorporate a level of structure, but also enable them to personalize at scale, enter a personalized premise, how to hook it and stick the landing in the CTA. And because of that, it started to get my head thinking in terms of what is the actual, attribution source, and what is the play that is actually being run here. So I started, blitzing out a graph essentially of like, here's the 16 plays that you can do. And then when I started to expand into account executive, I was an account executive for 5 years. So I started thinking about all of the plays that I ran as an account executive. And I'm like, holy cow. So I started to, fan out into those. And then I was running one night, and all of a sudden I realized I had been coining all of the leads in between inbound and outbound as what I would call postbound. So I made up my own word, and I said, okay, this is, something that's in between inbound and true outbound. And we'll get into what the definition of that is in a minute. But I was running one night, and all of these source plays weren't quite fitting into the postbound definition. And I was running one night, 11:45, about a month and a half ago. And I just stopped dead in my tracks. And I said, holy cow, there's another, well, I didn't say cow. I said, holy cow, there is another category. So today we're going to go into all of the different plays that you could do. And I'm going to map them out in terms of what is the category, what is the actual play description. So it gives you a source of there's 66 in total, the 66 plays that you can run. It's going to be extremely dense, and also incorporate when would I do one-to-many relevance messaging, and when would I incorporate one-to-one in terms of personalization.
I love it. Quickly, Becc, we have so many people asking, will the deck be available after?
Yes, the deck will be available after, and I'm going to punish you guys with not giving you the PDF beforehand, but we created a nice nifty PDF so you'll have it afterwards, but I'm going to punish you in the meantime so that you aren't looking at that. But I will be broadcasting it during the session, and I will send the PDF and send the deck. So you will walk away with every single play, within a graphical format. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So the 6 pieces of today are going to be, number 1, the roadmap. So I'm going to show you the PDF and how they look. Number 2, inbound, which is our first category, the definition and the plays. Postbound, which is the definition and the plays. Bridge bound, which is going to be a new term for us today, the definitions and the plays. Cold outbound, what that actually means. And then we're going to finish off with how to sequence all of these. And I'm not only going to give you the playbook of how to incorporate 1-to-1, like personalization, but also how to incorporate, if you just want to do a relevance only playbook, there's only a few times that I would suggest that, but I want you to have that as well. So does that sound good, Scott?
I think I speak for everyone when I say let's rock and roll. Very excited.
Okay, awesome. So in terms of the roadmap, I'm going to stop my share here and I'm going to broadcast something different. So essentially, this is, and you're going to have to lean in. Can you see this PDF?
The writing is small, but we can see it.
Okay, so essentially, and I just want you to look from a high level here. So there are going to be 4 categories of, like I mentioned, to the deck today, and we're going to get into each one of these plays. But essentially, the first thing I want you to pay attention to, and this is when you get the PDF, there is a scale at the top here in terms of color, showing you what level of inbound or outbound this is. So on the left-hand side is going to be aggressively inbound, and on the right-hand side is going to be aggressively outbound. So you'll go from blue to black, essentially. The 4 different categories here are, number 1 is going to be inbound. Number 2 is going to be postbound, which is middle left. Middle right is bridge bound, which is going to be our meatiest category and newest category. And I'm going to spend the most time here. And then the far right is going to be cold outbound. So this is really instruction of once you get the PDF. The definitions are going to be listed the line underneath of what kinds of leads fit into there. The line below that is going to be whether the prospect will know your company or not, hypothetically. And then the colored bar here is going to be what kind of messaging strategy you incorporate. So this PDF is designed on, if you want to incorporate a personalization strategy, where would you use personalization and where would you use relevance and how can you intertwine both? And then it's going to give you all of the plays underneath. So I just want everyone to have a high level what this looks like, so you can be thinking about it. But again, you got far left is inbound, middle left is postbound, bridge bound's middle right, and then you've got cold outbound on the right-hand side. So let's go ahead and jump into definitions. You guys can see everything that's going on here. So, exit. Okay, sorry, my screen's not sharing. Okay.
Live webinars, it happens.
Okay.
We're good.
Here we go.
We're all ready.
Okay, we're back in. We're back
there
in.
We go.
Okay, so the first category we're going to go into is inbound. So the first thing I have heard with inbound is basically, if I have an inbound SDR team, then usually marketing will send over all of the demo requests, content downloads, webinar registrants, event attendees. They will blanket it all as inbound, and they will say, reach out to these leads. And most SDR teams that I know would say like, hey, there's a very, very big difference here. They say like the content downloads and webinar registrants aren't high quality. And what they mean by that is the buyer intent isn't there. Of like a demo request, essentially is someone who's saying, I want your product. And a content download is not necessarily someone who wants your product. It's just someone who is interested in your content. So very, very easy to confuse, and very, very strong reality for inbound SDR. So they usually go to the demo request first. So inbound, as defined for me, is a true hand raiser. This is someone who is raising their hand saying, I want to see your product. And there's only going to be, very, very simple here, there's only going to be 2 different sequences that you can run: demo requests and prospects who are using chat box. So imagine Drift, for instance, they're coming in via the Drift line. And these are people as defined. I would define inbound as anyone who is raising their hand saying, hey, I want to see your product. And you are essentially at that point qualifying the person to see if you want to talk to them. So this is the, for lack of a better analogy, this is the guy walking up to you at the bar that says, I want to buy you a drink. And you are asking a litany of questions of like, who are you? Are you employed? You know, how strong is the relationship with your family, et cetera. You're asking qualifying questions and you're essentially going through this lead and you're saying like, hey, I want to understand, you know, what does this person, like, what is the intent here? You know, a lot of people say like, you know, budget, do they have budget? Are they the decision maker? Is there a need, you know, timeline, like they're using the typical bank criterion, which there's more wear and tear here. You know, this is someone that's coming to you so you can ask the questions, but those are the only two plays for inbound that how I would define inbound.
Super quick. I think this is a good insightful comment from Moore. Said, could you add free trials if they sign up to a free trial? Would that fit into this bucket?
I'm glad that you asked more. Next category. That's a great question, but very, very close. So essentially, I will answer your question in a minute. Very, very good question. So postbound to me, which is the next category, is going to be non-hand raising marketing leads by definition. So this is anyone who comes through the marketing department, so they will know your company. For inbound, you can go one-to-many only, by the way. You can do just relevant messaging because essentially you don't have to personalize necessarily to someone who just wants a demo. Postbound is going to be a non-hand-raising marketing lead. And so where I got the term is in the NBA, I watch a lot of basketball as well as the MLB. And between the top of the key and the basket, essentially is a position called a post. You know, someone who is right there in the middle. So a postbound lead essentially is going to be anyone who comes in through marketing that is not raising their hand quite yet in terms of do they want to see your product. So there are 12 different sequences that I do for those. Number one is content downloads. So anyone who downloads your content, pretty straightforward. Number two, webinar registrants. Number three, buyer intent. So a lot of third-party review platforms out there. One example would be G2, you know, who I recently worked for. So essentially, Forrester did a report on all of the things that you consider whenever you're buying something. And the top 3 variables out of 20 that you consider is number one, peer-to-peer. You call your friend and you say like, hey, you know, are you using outreach? You know, what do you think, et cetera. Number two, you go to influencers. You know, you say like, you know, who is this person using? Who's big in the industry? And then number 3 is you want to see third-party reviews. So G2 Trust Radius is another good example of basically websites where you can go and read and leave reviews of different software, very, very detailed reviews. And so they can capture at that point the company and the geo of where that person is researching. And if you buy one of those platforms, you can feed them, they will feed you back of like, hey, someone over at Drift is you know, researching your product in Florida. So they can not only do on the actual, if they're researching you, if they're researching the space in general, and if they're researching your competitors. So the reason this is a postbound lead is, again, usually this is a marketing purchase. And so feeding any kind of leads back through marketing, this is a non-hand raiser, but it's a marketing lead that you could feed back through if you buy G2 or Trust Radius. By the way, before I go any deeper, I am not necessarily backing all of these plays. I will just tell you the litany of plays that you can run, that I've seen run. So full disclosure. Number 4 is free trials. So if you have a freemium product, you know, let's take Slack, for instance, you know, and they had a very, very high, I talked to their team at one point, they had a very, very high, obviously inbound, pool. So let's take me, for instance. I have onboarded Slack in terms of my company. I have not purchased Slack yet as a full-time tech tool. So I'm like good enough with the free trial. So the reason I would call this a non-hand raising marketing lead is because there's not buyer intent on my behalf. I'm not ready necessarily to buy Slack. And so I would group this as someone who is brought in by marketing. They're a relative, you know, inbound-ish feel. but they're not hand raising yet. I'm not raising my hand saying I'd like to buy Slack. So I would put free trials in the postbound category for that reason, but that was a really good question by Moore. Number 5, event attendees. So, these days it's virtual event attendees, very similar to webinar. But, once this all lifts, I hope, we'll go back to events. Number 6, followers on social to your company. So LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, anyone who's following you on LinkedIn. Number 7, they interacted with your company on social. So whereas number 6, they're following you. Number 7, they are, they have commented or shared or liked something, on your LinkedIn. So usually a high correlation of followers of people that will comment and like, but not necessarily. So that's the 7th play. Some of these are more automatable than others. And I think people would know why I would say that at this point, but some of these are more automatable than others. But number 8, blog subscribers. 9 is newsletter subscribers. 10 is dark funnel. So dark funnel, before everyone thinks I just make up terms all day, dark funnel is essentially, there are dark funnel providers where people are researching you, but they aren't essentially interacting with any of your content. So they haven't even gone the step to say, like, I want to download something or I want to be a hand raiser, but people are researching in their sweatpants more than ever before. Like they want to, that same Forrester research study, you have to go to the 20th variable, the last variable that people consider is a demo of your product. So by the time that they are getting to the demo, like usually there's very, very high amount of research that they've done beforehand. And so dark funnel is a way to use a third-party provider like 6 Sense or Bombora are 2 great examples, but they essentially can capture via their voodoo magic if someone is researching you on the web. So they call it dark funnel because it's not someone who has stepped into the light and taken any interaction with your company at all. Number 11 is high value MQL. So essentially people have, and I won't go too deep here, even though I'm tempted to, but people have historically, they have garnered an MQL off of lead scoring. They say like, okay, I'm going to give a certain amount of points for each one of these actions. Sometimes it incorporates title, sometimes it doesn't. And if someone hits a threshold, they'll become an MQL. And one of the things I was very passionate about is like, okay, but that doesn't incorporate title. So let me be very clear. If an intern of Oracle downloads 85 pieces of content, I still don't want to talk to them. Because if I book them, my AEs are going to be pretty pissed. If a VP of sales at Oracle blinks in my direction, I want to talk to them. So there's a difference there. So I essentially, instead of doing traditional lead scoring, I did away with lead scoring and said, hey, I want to essentially, if they've taken any one of these actions and they hit what I would define as ICC, ideal customer company, and that can be on a bandwidth of things of either tech stack or employee size or sales team size or industry, whatever have you. And then ICT, meaning they're the right discipline of title and the right hierarchy of title. So, for instance, I want managers of sales teams at 500 people, 500 employee companies and above, then they hit ICT and ICC. So, when it comes to an MQL, essentially the only case that it would become, someone would become an MQL without it actually being one of these former actions, because now we're going based on source, is if they opened a aggressive amount of marketing emails. So a lot of times people are essentially scoring on that. So you can pull them from that list and say like, okay, they open an aggressive amount of marketing emails, so I'm going to flux them into a high value MQL sequence. I would be very assumptive in the language of like, looks like, you're opening a lot of emails, and I'm not going to go too deep into the wording today, but that's just kind of a feel. But the 11th play really is, are they becoming an MQL because they're opening a certain amount of marketing emails? And then the 12th sequence that you can run that's postbound is website views. So anyone who's coming to your website, you could gate there, and you basically could flex them into a sequence. So those are all of the postbound plays essentially. And again, in review, these are non-hand-raising marketing leads. So I had essentially, when it came to marketing, just a quick couple tips before we move on here. When it comes to marketing, I essentially, one of the things that I did that was really helpful for my marketing team was we were setting, the big question here is list building of like, okay, I go through these marketing leads, but 80% of them are quote unquote bull crap. And so, I don't want to call all these people. And so the sales team ends up not calling all these people, or the SDR team ends up not calling all of these people. And then marketing's complaint, and very valid complaint, is like, well, they don't call anyone. And so they're just selfish, blah, blah. Sales hates marketing, marketing hates sales. And then we all, go tweet really positive stuff about them on LinkedIn, and round we go. And so one of the things that I did to clear up this relationship was essentially I was divided based on play. And I essentially said to my ops team, I said, okay, I want you to, from an automation perspective, I actually think the automation that I was running at Chorus was more interesting, or the operations were more intricate and interesting than even the messaging infrastructure. But I digress. One of the big time sucks here can be list building, essentially, like out of these people, who hits ICC, who hits ICT. Then once I have that list, if I'm an SDR, like, do I have to pass these around to named accounts of like other people own them, and, on and on. So essentially from a high level, what I did was I had within my CRM, essentially, if they did not hit ICC, meaning they weren't the right size company, and they, then I would clean them out automatically. If they didn't hit ICT, then meaning they're an intern or they're an individual contributor over at Oracle, then I would clean them out of the list. I would have a surface level list left. And I basically would say, if they are current customers, I want you to clean them out of the list and essentially route them to the AEs. And if they're self-sourcing, and if we're currently selling into them, I also want you to clean them out of the list. So now I have left, and it will be shocking to you if you do this, of like, it'll cut your list anywhere down from like 10,000 to like 250 people that truly are the people that you want to talk to. So marketing teams everywhere have basically said like, okay, fine, we'll jump in the pool, and we're going to be, based off of like, close one revenue, like tie me to that. And I'm like, wait, time out. You don't need to be held responsible for how well the sellers sell. And you also don't need to be held responsible for how well the SDRs book meetings. What I want you to be responsible for is getting people who we want to sell into, who we haven't currently sold into, interested, in our product and some level of interaction here. And so I was re-KPIing the marketing team to say like, hey, okay, 25% of your KPI is based on brand awareness. So that would be the 10,000 number in this example for webinar. 75% of your KPI is based off of, out of those people who hit ICC, ICT, we haven't sold into and aren't currently selling into. So that's your lead gen number. And that is basically 75% of your KPI system. So it reorged the marketing team to think like, I'm not going to host an event and tell all my salespeople to bring their current customers. And then when we hit 200 people, we're like, we got a ton of ROI from this. And it's like, well, current customers, but like from a lead gen perspective, we got nobody. So it really helped the marketing team start to be, really focused in the right direction. But that can really help from the marketing angle. But for each one of these in a sequence perspective, there's a way in your CRM, essentially, that if someone owns the account, they will get surface the lead. And for people who hit ICC and hit ICT, but were not owned by someone, they would go into a, let's say postbound unowned blog subscriber sequence. And I developed a postbound unowned team that was basically, from an automation view, following up on people who were not ABM, but we did want to sell into. And that team murdered their numbers, absolutely murdered their numbers. So I would say from a structural perspective, just kind of a quick tip here is I would, kind of quote unquote round robin, not round robin, but set up an operations and automation view to where you can sequence these people, it can get to the right person, and the people who you do want to sell into that aren't owned, you have a separate team that basically follows up on those leads, because you'd be absolutely shocked with the results. So my SDRs at the beginning, they're all like timid, like, we don't know, this is crazy, like Frankenstein lady, like, we don't know if we want to be on this team. And then like a week and a half deep, they're all pissed that they didn't raise their hand. And the two people who did were like, victory goes to the bold, right? So that was my experience with that.
So quickly, Becc,
yeah.
I'm gonna quickly jump in. A couple of great questions coming through on Postbound. And we'll keep these super short, succinct. So one is a great question from Michelle. You said you don't necessarily back all of these plays. Michelle wants to know which plays you do back. As we go through this, can you maybe highlight a few that you really like?
Yeah, I think it would be actually a short, that's a great, I love the question. Good for her, really good for her. I will highlight a couple of plays. I will wink at them when I don't like them. I don't love the play. But essentially in that pool, I like most of these plays. I mean, these are dependent on how much your marketing team essentially, but the only place I would have a question mark in this bucket is interact with your company on social or followers on social. It's not that it's not valuable. It's just, I don't know how to automate that. I haven't seen a way to automate. Please don't blow up my inbox with how your tool, blah, blah, blah. Please just save me. I don't know how to automate that, or I haven't seen a tool that can help me. Buyer intent and dark funnel, I will say it's dependent on a purchase. So both of those can be very valuable, but you're going to have to spend some money. So that's the only thing I would say about Postbound. But I will wink at you, Michelle. I will wink at the entire line when it's a play that I don't love, but I've seen a lot of people run.
Okay, and I'm going to sneak one more clarifying question in from Moore. So are you running sequences for each of these Postbound plays? So for each one of those that you described, you're going to have a different customized sequence for each one. That's what we're going through right now, correct?
Yes, yes. And I will get into the sequence infrastructure at the end, but they're actually all very, very similar in terms of structure and in terms of types of outreach. But the automation reason that I automate in fluxes for each one. So I will get into that. But yes, I am running a separate play because I want to understand from a data perspective, people don't, you can't reach out to someone and be like, hey, I noticed you kind of downloaded some content and attended this webinar and this event and or you're a high value MQL because you hit a certain amount of points. I'm like, no, all they want to hear is, I noticed you downloaded this piece of content, but more importantly, here's a personalized reason, so number one, it's better for the buyer journey for context. I wouldn't suggest relaxing on that reason of like, you download my content, like want to buy my product, because we all know how that playbook runs. If you don't know how that playbook runs, then maybe I should just punish everyone with a follow-up email to this session, see how many demos I get, but the other thing that it caused was I feel like in the industry, everyone views a sales engagement provider like outreach, and outreach. And they say like, hey, okay, I am going based on buyer persona and relevance premises only. So then they bully outreach and they say, and this is just my impression, they bully outreach and say like, hey, can you give us the top 3 words that work? Because each one of my templates, is different. And then they will produce some certain amount of research, which takes a lot of time and a lot of statisticians. And then everyone would get mad if you hired 150 statisticians and all of a sudden the outreach list price is 3x because you have to pay for all these statisticians that came from Yale. But I'm like, even if you were to get that data, the more generic the data, the rule is the less relevant to you. Of like, you're talking about different ICPs, different, industry segments, different industry verticals, et cetera. And so I feel like we're doing both, bearing both burdens to a sales engagement provider like outreach, saying like, hey, give me the top 3 words that work. And then when you deliver it, it's like, well, is this relevant to my industry? So TLDR, one of the great advantages of an approach like this is you can understand, even if you knew that a template worked really well, what are you going to do? Run it again? You can't run it again to your entire TAM if you ran it once and then HubSpot publishes an article and all of a sudden the thing doesn't work anymore because everyone's doing it. So this will give you an approach to understand, like, I don't necessarily want to understand, one more point and then I'll close it off. I would be shocked if everyone could pause right now and not go into your sales engagement provider, and you could tell me, if you're doing relevance only, the top performing template in terms of booked meetings conversion ratios off the top of your head. So I feel like we have churned personalization. And one of the reasons is because we said we want to measure this thing that we can't really measure. And even if we could, we can't really do anything with. So this will enable you to understand from a high level, which one of my plays is working the best, and also free up people to do personalization and communicate to marketing. Like, I don't need 10,000 MQLs. I need 300 content downloads, 500 webinar registrants, 600 virtual event attendees, because based on conversion, I know that this is going to stack up into my numbers. So it causes an amazing relationship between you and that team.
I like it. I like it. All right, Bridge Brown.
Okay.
New term completely. Trademark. Becc Holland. Let's go.
This is a category that I hope breaks the internet. I really do, for the better. So Bridge Bound, again, running one night, 11:45, and I'm like, holy, there's a middle right category of plays that I was running that essentially were not a marketing lead, but they still were a one-to-many premise. So Bridge Bound, by definition, is going to be a way to bridge into your prospect via one-to-many premises on segmented outbound approach. So far left is inbound, hand raiser. Middle left is postbound, non-hand raising marketing lead. Bridge bound is middle right, and it's a way to do segmented outbound with a one-to-many premise. And then cold outbound is the far right. Bridge bound has 4 different buckets to it and 2 different categories that are parent categories. So I've got one parent category that is, it will increase the likelihood that someone will take a meeting. And then a second parent category that will increase the likelihood that they will buy your product. And there are 2 categories underneath each one of those. So in the first case scenario, it's more likely. So these first 2 buckets, if you will, are under the case scenario that it's more likely that they will take a meeting, but not necessarily that they will end up buying your product. So let's jump in here. First is bridge bound based on relationship. So this will increase the likelihood they'll take a meeting, and I'll go through all the plays. This is the densest category, but it will not necessarily increase the likelihood that they will ultimately buy and that they have the pain point. So number 1, they share a common VC with your company. So I'm going to use outreach and seismic in this example of, like, I'm working for outreach and I'm trying to sell into seismic. So number 1 would be, we have, outreach has a common VC with seismic, pretty straightforward. Number 2, seismic has a common VC with outreach customers. This play I thought it was handed to me, and I thought, not in a billion years is this going to work. But I'm like, I'm data girl, so I flushed out my best guess on messaging, and it actually was a top performing play for us. So I wouldn't discount it too early, but point being, number 2 is seismic, who's my prospect again. I'm outreach, I'm selling into seismic. Seismic shares a common VC with one of an outreach customer. Number 3 is referral to the network of your happy customers. So let's say, outreach has a litany of different customers, and all of those people, if you have made them happy, which I hope we have, they have a pretty expansive network. So what is the play there of, like, they have a network? I think the stat, I read an article the other day, it says 87% of people are willing to refer into their network, not even happy customers, just customers in general, but only 7% of people ask for the referrals. So this play is to speak to that of, like, I have a customer, they're very, very happy, so I wanted to ask them, if they can make any referrals in. Number 4 is inbound referrals from my VC partners. So let's say Salesforce Ventures backs, outreach. So let's say Salesforce, as a VC wants outreach to be successful, and they will pass a certain amount of referrals to the rep saying, like, hey, you need to reach out to blank, blank, blank. They really want to buy outreach. Number 5 is the reverse. an outbound to the network of my VC partners. So let's say, when I was at Chorus, for instance, Doug Landis worked over at Emergence Capital. In the first case scenario, Doug was passing me leads as a rep. And number 5, I'm going to Doug Landis's LinkedIn profile and looking at all of his connections, and I'm trying to sell into Seismic, and I'm trying to see if he is connected with anyone at Seismic. Number 6, inbound referrals from your C-suite. This happens, both 6 and 7 actually happen pretty frequently. I was told that by a CEO. But inbound referrals of like the CEO knows someone, and they pass to the rep of like, hey, you need to sell to this person. They said that they were interested in buying outreach. So let's say Manny in this case. Manny came to a rep and said, hey, you need to talk to this person because, they're interested in buying outreach. Number 7 is outbound to the network of the C-suite. So I, as an AE, am going to go to Manny's connections on LinkedIn and scour through and say, is there anyone from Seismic in here so I can sell into Seismic? Number 8 is inbound referrals from your advisors. So, I'm an advisor for instance, I'm an advisor for Vendition. That this would be me sending a lead to Vendition of like, hey, this person's interested in analyzing you, or looking at bringing you guys on board. Number 9, Vendition employees are coming to my network, on LinkedIn and saying like, hey, Becc, you're connected to X, Y, and Z, and we're trying to sell into that company. Is there any kind of relationship here? Is this real? Et cetera. Can you make an introduction, or can we drop your name and try to go in that way? So, always with these for the outbound, I would try to involve the person first and say like, do you know these people? And if not, even ask the permission to use their name just on a quick tip, but the play remains the same of, I'm going to go to, Beck's network and see like, she's an advisor for me. I'm going to go to her network and see if she's connected with anyone from that company. Number 10, inbound referrals from the board of directors. Number 11, outbound to the network of the board of directors. Number 12, inbound referrals from customer advisors. For instance, when I was at Chorus, Jake Rennie was a customer advisor. He's over at Tiled. So number 12 would be Jake is sending me leads, of like, hey, you need to talk to this person. Number 13 is I am going outbound to Jake Rennie's network and looking at his connections on LinkedIn and saying, excuse me, I'm hunting into Twilio. Is he connected with anyone at Twilio? Number 14 is inbound referral from an influencer. Number 15 is outbound to the network of that influencer. Number 16 is inbound referral from a non-sales employee. So let's say, in the outreach instance, there's a CSM, I'm going to call it Danny Kish. Danny's like, hey, you need to talk to I love Danny if you're watching this.
It's the man. Shout out Danny.
Shout out Danny. But he, is a CSM, and he would say like, hey, Becc, you're the sales rep. I have this friend that wants to buy outreach. Can you talk to them? And the reason I say non-sales employee is because usually if they are a sales employee, they would just close it themselves or fight for the account. But any kind of non-sales employee that they're sending me leads. Number 17, a non-sales hire that used to work at that company. So let's say, I'm trying to, let's use like Twilio, for instance. I am a VP of product. I just got hired at Outreach, and now all of a sudden, and I came from Twilio, and that would, go to show of like, if I had a positive experience at Twilio, that I could leverage that to, go into Twilio of like, okay, this person knows the org inside and out, can make an introduction, et cetera. Number 18, there are 5 different examples of it, and this is your network. I am an AE or I'm an SDR, and this is my personal network. And there are 5 different ways that you can leverage your network, or 5 different plays you can leverage it. Number 1, you have friends that are past employees at the org you're trying to hunt into. So in this case scenario, I have friends that used to work at Twilio, is the first play. Second play is I have friends that currently work at Twilio, and for lack of better terms, they are groundswell. They are an individual contributor. So I have a friend that's a individual contributor. I'm selling into the sales ICP over at Twilio. So how do I use that to multi-thread up to the decision maker through water cooler talk? Number 3, I have friends that currently work at Twilio who are the decision maker. That's nice. What's the play there? Number 4, friends who are connected to the decision maker at Twilio. So let's say Mark Borditsky, for instance. I've never met him, but I've been a huge fan of his for a while. He is a CRO now over at Twilio, and he was an SVP. So congrats, Mark, if you are ever watching this. But he essentially is a CRO. So do I have friends that are connected to Mark? And can I leverage that to get a meeting with him? 5th case scenario and last case scenario for your network is prospects who interacted with you on LinkedIn. This sounds crazy, but I have added people on, LinkedIn before whenever I wanted to essentially prospect into them. And they'll add me, and then I send them some tear-jerking email, saying like, oh my gosh, please work with us, blah, blah, blah. They didn't respond to the email or subsequent emails, and then they'll like my posts and comment on my posts. I'm like, you big psychopath. But they do this. People do this for some reason. So the 5th play is, how do I deal with that group of psychopaths that won't answer me, but are just sitting there liking my posts all day long? I
think that should be another webinar, Becc. How to deal with psychopaths. I would like a full hour on that.
How to leverage the psychopaths. There's a deep category there, but essentially this is the 5th play within your network of people who you've added on social, who are interacting back with you, not your company. Number 19 is prospects you met at a networking event. 20 is they interacted with a non-sales employee on social. So in this example, it would be, I saw someone, Mark over at Twilio, essentially was making comments on Danny Kish, our CSM's post. So there's got to be something going on there, like level of relationship, etc. And then number 21 is competitors of your current clients. So this play, Michelle, is essentially used, I hear it a lot, of like,
sorry, is the wink, I can't remember, is the wink you like it or you don't like it? You don't like it. Okay, got it. Just making sure I understand the wink.
Yes, and the wink was brutal, by the way. But this play, essentially, I hear this all the time of like, oh yeah, okay, well, we just sold into, I'm trying to use someone non-sales tech related. Anywho, we just sold into this person. Awesome, they just bought our product. You know what we should do? Go to their competitor and be like, hey, this company just bought us. Don't you want to buy us? And it's like, my view is, if I'm that competitive company, I'd be like, thanks for the update on their strategy and tech stack. Are you going to do that to me if I ever bought you? I don't want your tool. I want something better because I want to outrun them. So I don't want to use the same bat that they're using. I want to use something better. So I don't love this play. That's why I listed it last. But this is a play that people run for some reason. And I would say, if your current client ever finds out that you mentioned them, etc., you will be in a beehive of trouble. But it's here because when I said comprehensive, I wanted to go comprehensive.
I like it. Becc, quick question. Henry Briggs, great questions. I love really thoughtful questions coming through. Henry says, why categories, read the inbound referral play. That's what we're going off of. Why categorize them into bridge bound as opposed to postbound? How does the strategy change when reaching out to them? Yes.
So we will get into the strategy of reaching out to them later. Each one of them can be different dependent on who you are, of like, are you the AE that holds the relationship? Are you an SDR? Like, for instance, like referral to the happy network of customers. The reason I did not put that in postbound, because as a reminder, postbound is marketing leads, non-hand raising marketing leads. So essentially, an inbound referral from your C-suite is not someone who is caused by it, not something that was caused by marketing. So that's the bifurcation there. And the split is this a marketing or is this a non-marketing? So for instance, I put people who interacted with your company on LinkedIn or who are followers in postbound, people who interacted with you or with a non-sales employee on LinkedIn, and bridge bound based on relationship, because one is really a result of the marketing perspective, and then the other is the latter is not. So that's where this is, but really, really good question. And we'll get into the messaging strategy later.
Perfect. I love it. Let's keep her rolling.
Okay, so bridge bound based on history. This is going to be, so in the first case scenario, bridge bound based on relationship, that obviously will increase the likelihood that they will take a meeting. If I know Manny and Manny says, you need to, talk to this person, out of respect, I would take the meeting. Doesn't mean I have the pain point. Doesn't mean I don't have the pain point, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily have the pain point or the problem, but it does mean that I will probably take a meeting out of a deep, deep respect for Manny. I hope he's watching. For him, I would jump on the phone. The second play, or the second category of bridge bound, essentially is the same in terms of, it's more likely that I take a meeting, but not necessarily that I have the pain point or the problem that is going to make me buy. So this is bridge bound based on history with your company. So bridge bound based on history, the first first play you can run is people who requested a demo, but didn't schedule one. So I have seen a number of different, companies in the industry, upwards of, I don't know, probably 300. And the people who requested a demo that didn't actually made it into one is shockingly low. So I've seen anywhere from 12% on the low end to 25% on the high end. And so let's argue for a minute that 35% of these people were unqualified. They did not hit ICC, they did not hit ICT. You still have a delta. And one of the best case scenarios, that 40% of the people that requested a demo did not actually jump into a demo because of, I would argue, process, which another session for another time. Go into season 1 and I cover a process, but point being, the first play here that can be very successful is people who requested a demo, and you can put the threshold in terms of time. Who requested a demo but didn't actually schedule one for whatever reason. I'm going to put outsource the reason why, but that's the first play. Second play is close lost. VPs of sales everywhere. This one's for you, like Babe Ruth in it. Close lost. The tighter that you can get your reasoning within the CRM, the better, because you can then automate it. So this is one of the things we were doing at Chorus that was really lethalized the prospecting team. But there are 4 cases of close lost. Number 1, close lost, they went with a competitor. And all these number 2 buckets, they are telling you this answer. So this is the case that they told you this. So number 1 within close loss is they went with a competitor and they're up on renewal. So if you have aggressive decline reasons within your CRM, then essentially you can say like, hey, close loss went with a competitor, and then you can time in 10 months, I want to sequence these people, because most people, I'm not reinventing the wheel in terms of that I thought of this play. This is just how to automate this play so that you don't miss it. If like they just bought a competitor, and 9 months from now, I want to nurture them all along, or whatever you want the play to be. But in 9 months, I want them to be sequenced into this so that I can reach out and see how their current relationship is going. Number 2, close loss, they didn't hit ICC. So again, as a reminder, ICC is ideal customer company. So they weren't big enough, for instance. Number 3, I didn't hit ICC in terms of a qualifying criterion. So for instance, when I was at Chorus, we would have a drop-down menu of, let's say they don't they integrate with someone that we don't integrate with, or they have a CRM that we didn't integrate with. So you could have aggressive drop-down of like, okay, they didn't have the right stack, and then it says, what stack do they have? And you say, they have, whatever, HubSpot. And all of a sudden, and we, hypothetically, we didn't integrate with HubSpot. So then whenever we do integrate with HubSpot, I all of a sudden have a short list of all of the people that wanted to buy our product but couldn't because of that limiting factor. Or, we sold in English, to people who sold in English remotely. So it'd say didn't have the right language, or, didn't have the language we sold into. What language do they sell in? French. Okay, okay, whenever I expand to French, I want the short list of all the people who sell in French, so that I can automate them into this sequence. So those are the first 3. and then AEs everywhere are going to kill me and shut their computers and say I'm the snow queen. But the only other case is you messed up. You went with a competitor, which arguably you messed up. They didn't hit ICC. They truly weren't qualified, didn't hit ICC, or had some qualifying criterion, or you messed up. So what you'll see the reasoning being from your prospects. And again, this is a case scenario that they told you something, would be no budget and bad timing, for like, let's punt this to Q1, Q2. Been there, by the way. So I'm certainly not exempt from this, but that's the fourth case scenario. And so what is the different play? I'm busting these out because I run a different play for each one of these. Number 3 is they ghosted you or went dark. So the difference being number 2D, they told you no budget, no timing. And number 3, the more likely case scenario, at least in my experience, is they ghosted you. They just went dark. And so what's the play there, and how can I pattern interrupt and get back in the game? Number 4 is executive churn. So what I mean by executive churn is prospects are changing jobs. So, for instance, User Gems is a great tool that you can use of how to automate this. But the first case scenario is, they used outreach, and then they were at, let's say, Twilio, and they used outreach, and then they changed jobs to Drift. And Drift does not have outreach. And so what is the play there? They already know outreach, they're happy with outreach. They've liked the interaction so far. And so how do I sell into them now at Drift? Because it should be a low bar of like, they liked your tool. And I think the stat is that 85% of the tech is bought, and decisions are made from a process perspective within the first, I think it's 60 or 90 days, like very short time period. So how do we automate that? Number 2, executive churn, is they used your product and changed roles internally. So let's say I'm at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions, and outreach is sold into that division, and then they go to take over they're the head of Marketing Solutions now at LinkedIn. So I want to know that as a trigger, so I can say like, hey, enterprise buys usually on one group, and they're all a different sale. So how do I prospect into Marketing Solutions since they've already used outreach? And then the third case scenario for executive churn is they've never used your product, but you were trying to prospect into Twilio. They just took on a VP of sales role at Twilio. And so essentially you reach out to them based on that. So again, I know I'm going very, very deep here. And if you think it's deep already, like, just hold on to your butts, people, because we're going to go even deeper. But I want you guys to have the guide. So those are all the ones for executive churn. Because again, they're going to make their purchasing decision quickly. So it's all about how do you automate. I'm not the queen of that I made up the play, but it's how do I automate this so that my reps remember to do it and they have it right in front of them, so essentially, they execute it well. Number 5 is they open to your prospecting emails. So I was running a play, for instance, at Chorus, where if they opened my prospecting email, I triggered them into, there's a way to do an outreach where you can lift a task and say like, hey, this person just opened an email. Or you could even put a play together where what I did of like, we call them twice a day and be like, oh my gosh, you're opening the email. I had no idea. But I like that play. I winked, but I like that play. And I think my tongue was out when I winked. But call them twice that day, call them twice the next day was the play I was running. Number 6, and then resume in the existing sequence. Number 6, they aggressively opened your prospecting emails. And let me tell you why those are different. What I mean by aggressive is 15 or more. If someone is opening my email 15 or more times, they're typically doing one of two things. They're either sending it to your competitor, which happens all the time. I've worked for 2 competitors, and in both case scenarios, I got the emails from the other one. Or a very likely case scenario, especially if you're personalizing, is they are taking that email and they are sending it to the entire sales team and saying, oh my gosh, this was the best email that I ever got. This was personalized. You guys need to do this, and I'm going to take the meeting because of it. But it's all talk, and they didn't actually take the meeting with you. They just wanted to say that to their sales reps to make them motivated. So a different play in that case scenario, typically I go in with a fall on your sword case scenario of like, hey, I want to get back in front of them and remind them without being like, hey, remember me? Like, I'm the person that sent you that mug, because you didn't earn anything by sending them the mug. Typically my play is something like, hey, I just wanted to apologize if that was too much. I was just really a big fan of your career. And so that's why I sent that thing over, via Sendoza or whatever. Given your competition with Lyft, I thought you might like the following article on selling against your competitors. Either way, such a big fan of your team. Let me know if I can be of any help in the meantime. And that play, it's like very, very high conversion because they'll fight to correct you. No, that was the best play I've ever seen run. I remember we were all brought on site whenever I first deployed this play. I basically told the rep, I said, we're going to run a high risk, high reward play. And he was sweating during, I said, look, if this play doesn't work, I'll give you $100. Okay. So I gave you the meeting money either way. And so we did it. And the person responded within 5 minutes saying, I don't know whether to hire you or bring on your tool. Let's start with the latter. And gave us an on-site for a very, very well-known org. And so there are different plays here, but you get the gist. And then number 7 is vendors who just sold you their product. And now you want to tit for tat it and say like, hey, we just bought your stuff. You want to buy mine? It's a play. Michelle, I hope you're still on here so I don't look like an idiot for the rest of this webinar. But,
we need a Beck's wink guide to decipher the different kinds of winks that we have. So next webinar, can we make that happen?
We can't. It's like the Dickens list.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is all the plays for Bridgebound based on history with your company. Again, those 2 plays will increase the likelihood that they will take a meeting, not necessarily the likelihood that they will ultimately buy your product. So, for instance, if I know Manny, I'll jump on the phone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have the need. So those are the first 2 categories. Are we good with questions or am I good to go into the third one?
We're good. We have some clarifying questions, but we're going to go into premise pairing and strategy after these, which yes. Most of the questions will be answered. But no, this is great stuff. Keep it rocking.
So this is the third category. So this is Bridgebound based on symptoms, pains, and problems. And this, I hope, is what will, I don't know. I hope people can really use this effectively. I think it's the most different or unique that I've seen on the market. And I have to give credit to someone. I hope that they're on the line. And I'm going to make everyone guess who it is, maybe in the chat. But there is a well-known consultant that is very dear to my heart, and he got me thinking a lot about problem, pain, problem. And it got in my head so much that I'm like, he's right. If someone doesn't have a problem, then they're not going to buy your software, because if they're an effective leader, they're not going to buy it based on relationship. They're going to buy it if they have a problem they can then solve. And so I actually have to give credit because he got my mind thinking in this vein. But essentially this category is how do I sequence people based on overt symptoms, pains, and problems that you can see from the external view looking at the org. So most people, they're like, I love problems. That's what makes selling easy. But the only time I can get them is once I'm in the meeting. Then I'm hunting for problem, and I'm hunting for pain, and I'm hunting for, all these meaty, things here. But I wanted to find a way to essentially get in front of those people. You're not going to have a conference where people just show up and say, like, it's the problem conference of like, I'm not hitting my numbers conference. No one would show up to that because they're like, they want to pretend on an external front like all's good. So this is going to be a category of how can I sequence people and send people messages based on that I believe from an external perspective that they have a problem or pain that I can solve for in specific for their org. So I'm going to start with 3, and then there's a second grouping of 6. It's more significant. But
wait, Becc, did you tell us who the inspiration was? People are guessing like crazy. Are you withholding this information?
I think I'm going to withhold it because I want to see who the guesses are.
There's a lot of guesses.
I'm going to check in here. Most of you are wrong. One of you, a couple of you are, yeah. So the right person is in here, but most of you are wrong. So anywho, not to call you wrong, you're just wrong in this voodoo mind trap game, but
All right.
the right person is in there. And he's incredible. The first sequence is they left negative reviews of your competitor on G2. So for instance, this will give you a litany of two things, that they have two problems. Number one, they had the pain point deep enough to buy your competitor. So whatever it is you're looking to solve for, they tried to solve with someone else. And then number two, they didn't solve that with this competitor because they're leaving a nasty review of them on G2. So they have two pains of like, they needed it to be solved. They needed pipeline creation to be solved, and they tried to solve it in all earnest with buying someone else, and that didn't work. And so it didn't work enough to where it motivated them to share their words on a review platform. So that is sequence number one. Number two, churned customers of your competitors. A way to do this before people think that you can't automate this is if you go to a tool like G2 Track or DataFox or Crunchbase, you essentially can pick up on if someone has integrated an SDK. And so there is a way, especially within G2 Track, I worked for the product. You can sequence based on I want people who have disintegrated a certain platform. So if I'm selling against a competitor, I want to sequence through all of the people who, had my competitor and then all of a sudden didn't have my competitor. So that would be sequence number two is, again, they try to solve for it. They had the pain point that they try to solve with your competitor, and all of a sudden they're not working with the competitor anymore. So I'd, if someone was solving a very big pain point for me or very big problem for me, I have a hard time believing that I wouldn't buy their tool. Number three, act of God. So this is a sequence whenever there is a massive shift in the market based on a third-party thing that basically creates unprecedented demand for your product. So great example is, the pandemic hit. All of a sudden, Zoom's flying off the shelves. So, all due respect to Zoom, it's not like their sales team just got 15x better at handling objections. All of a sudden, a pandemic hit and there's a shift in the market of everyone selling remotely, or everyone's, needs to attend school in their homes. And so an act of God sequence, this is a sequence on there is a third-party shift that happens, and all of a sudden there is a pain or a problem that people need to solve with your product. The next category is what I am very, very excited about. So the next category is going to be 6 sequences that you can, or plays that you can run based off of 3 different things. So I want you to pay attention to, we got business impact, we got lagging indicator, and we got variable. And these are outputs, inputs, and midputs. I made up that word. It's different wink. I made up that word, midputs. So let's start in from the top. Number 4 is going to be, there's a presence of a negative output. So let's take flip the script, for instance. I solve for, teams that aren't hitting quota, essentially. They're not booking enough meetings and they're not closing enough deals. So a negative output, business impact wise, would be, I want to know all of the teams that miss their quota in Q3. And so I don't know necessarily if they have the pain point or the problem, but I'm guessing that they do. So this would be, public companies that are post-IPO, that their financials are online and they miss quota. So I want to sequence all of these people based off of that. Now, I would say the language here, you can't exactly walk in and be like, hey, saw you, biffed your numbers in Q3. Like, want to talk? I'm the hero that solves for that. So I'd be very careful here in terms of language. I have to think it through. This is, new for me too, but my instinct is to just say personalization and not talk about all their faults and build rapport through that of like, hey, I noticed you wrote this article. We typically work with X, Y, and Z and not call out their flaw or, the struggle that they're having because it can turn the relationship. But point being, I want to sequence people that are having the negative output business impact that my company solves for in terms of lagging indicator. Number 5 is going to be an absence of a positive output. So I'll give you an example, as in for weight loss, for instance. A presence of a negative output is I'm not comfortable in the body that I'm in, and I want to lose some weight. And there's a picture. Number 5 is the absence of a positive output, meaning if people have usually, this is a generalization, but if they have the body that they want, you'll see them like posting pictures on Facebook of them in a bathing suit, like here's me walking down the beach, etc. So the absence of a positive output would be, I don't know if there's necessarily a pain point, but, in the business world of like, if people are hitting their quota and hitting accelerators, Scott, what's the first thing you'll see them do on LinkedIn?
Probably talk about it.
They talk about it.
Update their profile, like do a post or something.
Totally. Yeah. I'm President's Club. Our org over at, whatever, Oracle just hit our stretch quota and we're so proud of our reps and on and on and on. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if they don't have those posts, that they, aren't hitting their business and their goals, but usually as a motivational thing at minimum, and as a, they trust your vendor at a maximum, they will say like, hey, we're hitting our goals. And so here's, some kind of litany of different resume that we are hitting our goals. So number 5 is the absence of a positive output. Number 6 is the presence, and this is for all you product companies out there, product focused companies out there, the presence of a negative midput, which is a lagging indicator. And I'll give you an example. I saw for a lot of times with, in the consulting perspective, they say like, we just need more numbers. So we want you to help with the objection handling. We want you to teach them some trick that, will help with objection handling. And I'm like, that's cool, but industry average is 40 dials per day. Industry average is 3 connects per day off of those 40 dials. So let's say for an instance that I have buy-in with the org and all these reps, instantly trust that what I'm going to tell them is going to work better than what they currently do, which is not always the case. And let's say that they're all bought in. Let's say all those are solved and they are paying attention in the session. Okay, average retention is 15%. So if they can retain it and they can remember it and then they can deploy it correctly, then roughly a lot of variables have to be stacked up. Essentially, I'm going to take them from those 3 connects per day from 20% conversion to 25% conversion. So now instead of converting 0.6 meetings per day via call, I'm getting 0.75, and you're asking me to move the needle. So I'm going to start with the inbound line of you're converting 15% of the people who are asking for a demo into a demo. I'm going to take you from there to 70. And then we can talk about this objection handling thing. I'll probably focus on playbook next, but point being, a midput is I would go to the website and I would say, I'm going to request a demo from this company. And if it takes me more than 2 weeks to actually get a demo, then I don't know necessarily if they're churning users on the demo request line, but it's good to guess of like, if I'm a VP of sales at Oracle, I'm not going to wait 2 weeks for a demo or, sometimes a qualifying call with an SDR. So this is you essentially, quote unquote, testing your prospective companies of, do they have a positive or negative buyer journey, in terms of what your product solves for. So if I'm, Drift essentially, and I'm selling via chat box, I go to their website and I basically test the inbound process and say like, what is my buyer experience here? So that I can, with educated guess, think like, I don't know if they're necessarily churning users based on this thing, but based on my experience, I either, had a very negative experience. It took me 3 weeks to get a demo, or an absence of a positive experience of like, I can only name one company that I've had an extremely positive experience inbounding with them. If like they treated me with respect right off the bat, I got a conversation, even though I had a high buyer intent, et cetera. So these are 2 ways to sequence people based on you, and it's going to depend on what you're selling. You try to test out whatever you solve for, with that company. And if they have a really high, you have a positive experience, I wouldn't sequence them. I wouldn't reach out. They're probably not going to buy. but if you don't, then you can put them into these two sequences. And then the last two sequences are variable inputs. So essentially, in the weight loss example, sequence 8 is presence of a negative input of like, I don't know, if they're at their fitness goals, but I walk into their house and all I see is Oreos, nothing but Oreos. So like, I'm guessing based on that there might be some problems. So business wise, that would be, I go to their team and they have 350 reps. They have 50 reps, they have 2 managers, they have no sales enablement person, and they have no real tech. Okay, I don't know if it's a crap show internally, but I'm guessing based on that stat of like, if you have 25 direct reports and no tech and no sales enablement, if you have 25 direct reports, period, like there's probably not a lot of attention being paid. And so can I reach out to them? And then number 9 is absence of a positive input. So, a great example in the weight loss would be, I go to their fridge and I don't see any vegetables, or I don't see anything at all. So I'm guessing based on this input that, again, there's not a positive input. They haven't taken the time to invest in training, et cetera. So I can probably understand that they can use some guidance in terms of selling. So those are the 9, essentially, if you can sequence them. Again, I would think through the language very, very heavily. I would definitely suggest that you don't reach out, especially with someone that you don't know, talking about all the things that you've noticed, because if you notice them, you're probably more accurate that they are not excelling at. So I would usually go probably a personalization strategy, and just be the right person at the right time. And then the last, we have a question.
Yeah, there's one I want to get in. There's 2 actually that I'll combine. I think it's important. Janet says, most of these bridge-bound plays appear to require a significant amount of research. How much time do you allocate for research? And do you automate the prospect sourcing? Or is this on the SDR to do?
Most of these are automated, actually. So you can, for instance, for the negative output business impact, you could scour through. There is essentially, and each one of these plays are different. So I unfortunately can't go into the ops of it, but just so you know, as a teaser, most of these actually, I'd say 97% can be automated. So this case scenario, let's say, via Crunchbase, I want to surface all of the companies that have these variables. Their IPO, there's a delta between the number that they said they were going to hit and the number that they have, or, the inputs of like, I want any team sizes that are, 50 employees or sales employees or more, and they only have a certain amount of leaders. So most of these actually, they're a little complex in terms of these pain ones, but certainly the rest of them, there actually is a way to operationalize them. So I'd be thinking through what are the external data points that I can gather and how can I sequence them automatically. Now, when it comes to like relationship, like inbound referrals, yeah, you'd have to manually load. Like there's no way to automate, but usually that is in a high, it doesn't happen all the time. So some of them, there's a more significant lift than the others. But I would always suggest put the playbook down. And then even if you did have to put these people in the playbook of like, it's better than not having a playbook and not tracking it and not seeing the effectiveness of it and not remembering emails 2, 4, and 5, so I'd always suggest of, put everything in a certain playbook. So number 1, you can see if the playbook's working or you need to adjust. Number 2, you can be reminded of what the steps would have been for the playbook. And then number 3, you can figure out whether that play actually works or not. And so you can prioritize your sequences based off of, like if I have content downloads, they're working really well. So I want to sequence that play. So for all of these plays for my reps in the past, I essentially was monitoring based on a certain amount of data on the back end. And I won't go in, if you want to see more good as season 2, episode 2, I believe, where I talk about how to rank your sequences. But essentially every single month I would be studying what was the impact, how immediate were these leads, how important were these leads, and how easy were these leads to get with several different variables. And I was renumbering them for my reps. So I said, don't worry about the actual title of this sequence, worry about the number, just fall in love with counting. So, they would come in and they go to sequence 1. If there were, were steps due, they do that. 2 steps due, they do that. 3 steps, and they would go on and on in their day. So one of the major pain points for the industry is I don't know what to do as an SDR. What does my daily workflow look like? So all of the who, what play, what channel, et cetera, was being answered, by me, essentially as a leader. My main thing that I was going towards was lift. And then they were only focused on how do I tease out the personalized premise, and then how do I hook it.
I love it. Quickly, I'm going to jump in and do a super quick shout out. I know we've got a lot to get through. We got like 10 more minutes, but we'll keep it rolling. Just for everyone who is joining us, I do want to shout this out. So Becc promotes all of this content, all this incredible stuff with no help from any marketing team. She's literally a one-woman shop, and I know her very well. I consider myself lucky to, and her goal really is as pure and as simple as trying to level up the sales profession, all of which we are involved in. So if you're enjoying this content as much as I am, and it even gets better as we go through it, we got a lot to get through. I will ask everyone who's on this, if you got value from this, only if you got value from this, if everyone can do a quick post on LinkedIn tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific, describing 3 things that you learned from this webinar. Tag Flip the Script, tag Becc, tag myself. We'll get in there. We'll give it some love. It goes a really long way. And we just want to get this content in front of as many people as possible so that they can benefit and we can level up our entire profession. Again, only if you got value from it, but let's do it tomorrow, 11 a.m. Pacific on LinkedIn. Thank you all. Back to you, Becc.
I'm like, my cheeks are hurting because how much I'm smiling. That actually means a lot to me. And thank you in advance to anyone who would do that, but means a lot to me, Scott. So last category. Now I'm like all distracted. I'm like all happy. So last category, bridge bound based on an educated guess they're in market. I'll briefly touch on the messaging and then I can, answer a couple questions if people want to stick around. But the last category within bridge bound. So again, categories 1 and 2, bridge bound based on a relationship and bridge bound based on history, increases the likelihood they'll take a meeting, but not necessarily that they'll buy. Bridge bound category 3 with the benefactor of our mystery consultant in terms of mindset based on symptoms, pains, and problems will increase the likelihood that they will buy because they have the pain point, but not necessarily that they'll take a meeting. This also fits in that category of bridge bound based on an educated guess that they're in market, so it will increase the likelihood that they'll buy, but not necessarily that they will take a meeting unless you have, I'd say a personalized strategy would be helpful. There's only 5 plays to this. One of them you cannot sequence or automate. I can't remember the woman's name who mentioned that, but this is the only play that I'd say is impossible to automate. But number 1 is a channel play. So not necessarily a channel play if you have a channel agreement with that vendor of like, let's say for instance, I was selling Chorus and people who usually buy outreach, are in the market for conversation intelligence. So, usually whenever you're starting a business, you'll buy, or you're on a path, you'll have to buy several different pieces of equipment. So I want to be a full-time marathon runner. All of a sudden I'm not just buying shoes. I'm buying shoes, I'm buying socks, I'm buying pants, I'm buying shirts, I'm buying, gels, etc. So the channel play is I want to sequence everyone who has bought in real time, outreach, so I can understand of like, okay, if they bought outreach, they might be in the market for CI. Number 2, and this is the full disclosure only play you cannot automate, but it's very valuable if you can find out the information, is evaluating a competitor. They are currently evaluating a competitor. Very high risk for people, meaning in terms of not only would you lose the deal, but you lose it to the enemy, so to speak. So if you do get wind, again, I always suggest that you put them in a play, so that you can understand how effective is that play. It will remind you of different steps and you can run an aggressive playbook and make that playbook better. So I would not leave it to pen and paper and back of the bar napkin math. I would say like, I want to increase the measure. You can't improve anything that you can't measure. So the first piece of Billy Bean was not Billy Bean. It was 100 and so odd years ago, before basically the creator, I can't remember his last name, Henry something, he created box scores of like, I want to start measuring all the things that are happening on the field. people that get on base, people that, their slugging percentage, et cetera. So the first piece is like, how do I, grab this data? The second piece is, what do I do about it? So, Billy Beane was actually preceded by upwards of 20 people who established books, created the Society of American Baseball Research, even at the Oakland A's, actually, not to burst anyone's dream, there was a predecessor to him, Sandy Alderson, who essentially was doing sabermetrics. And then Billy Beane came in and brought in another guy and basically was the first one to really make it work. But point being, you need to gather the data, so I'd say that's the first step. And then what do I do with that data? So I would sequence this very high immediate sequence, because they're obviously, they're going to trade to the enemy. They're going to trade to the Yankees if you don't get them. So I would sequence this as a play. And then the last three here are firmographic triggers. So I put IPO, company funding, and hypergrowth. Typically people, they have the cash in these case scenarios, or they have the need, but you can, through Crunchbase, sequence in real time, essentially any company that IPOs, of Zoom Info, for instance, just IPO. Congrats, Henry Schuck, if you're listening. Different Henry. Congrats, Henry Schuck, if you're listening. But he just IPO'd, PagerDuty, Slack, etc. I want them in the sequence, and I want to, run. I would always suggest of like, especially with company funding, you don't want to be the person that says, hey, you just got money, want to buy my shit because I sell shit for money. You essentially want to get them into play, be personalized, but be the right person at the right time. And then the last one here is hypergrowth. So you can define what that means to you. I want people who brought on this amount of people, salespeople, in the last time frame, and I want them sequenced into play. So that is all of Bridgebound. And the last category, very simple, it's cold outbound. There's only one sequence. So it's not that cold outbound doesn't exist, because people are lying to you. Cold outbound exists. It just shouldn't be the most likely case scenario. So here, all you have is personalization, of one-to-one only, because you don't essentially have a quote unquote relevant, unless it's buyer, quote unquote buyer persona or industry vertical of how you help VPs of sales, blah, blah. But, cold outbound should be only one sequence. So that's far right. We're at time, but we have 243 people still on the line. So I'm going to go in for 6 minutes on the how to pair these premises for personalization and relevance, and then we can close out. Thank you for staying on the line. I can't tell you what that means to me. Strategy with personalization and relevance, because I'm apparently the queen of personalization. But the 5 premise buckets, everyone should, who's watched this before will know this piece. I'll touch very briefly. If you want, more information, go to core session 5 on personalization at scale. But essentially there are 5 buckets of personalization. And this is in ranking in terms of how they should respond. Self-authored content, Scott authored something. 2 is engaged content. Scott engaged with something but didn't author it himself. 3 is self-identified traits. Scott wrote something about himself on social. 4 is junk drawer, schools attended, personal interests, hobbies, etc. of Scott. How do I hook it? You have to hook it. And number, 5 is company data, M&A, blogs, post-hiring, website language. The only reason I would deem this as personalized, because personalized is one-to-one, relevance is one-to-many. So the only reason that I would say this is quote unquote personalized, it's like, is it a solid? Is it a liquid? No, it's a gel. So this is specific to their company. So you could segment of people within that company, but it's personalization data on their company in specific. It's the lowest trigger bucket anyway, but it's here. So essentially in these 4 case scenarios, the dark blue is what you can automate. You do not need a person to do it. So case scenario number 1 is an inbound. I would say give them an inbound premise and then give them educational content. Hi, Scott. Thanks for requesting a demo of Flip the Script. While I have you here, I thought you might like this article on X, Y, and Z. So always be adding value. I would say throw a piece of content in there. And again, both dark blue, because you don't need a person to do it. Number 2, with postbounds, these are non-hand-raising marketing leads. You can sequence based on the postbound premise. Hi, Scott. Reason for my outreach is I noticed you downloaded this content, X, and you can put the dynamic tag in there. But more importantly, and then you light blue, you need someone. More importantly, I saw you wrote this article on, X, Y, and Z. One thing that stood out to me. If you want more of this language, I have, thanks to the amazing team at Reggie and Outreach, I now have an integration with them. So I have 7 sequences. 7 of these plays, actually all of my language is mapped out. If you go to go.reggie.io, you should, I'll send the link in the follow-up that you can basically see all of my perspective on messaging. There's my product pitch. I hope it was good. I blacked out. But essentially, here's the infrastructure of like, you would need to change the postbound premise. You could do it on a dynamic tag, webinar that they attended, event they attended, etc. But more importantly, and then personalized premise that you would fill in. This is again for a personalized strategy. 3 for bridge-bound, it's the same thing, but as post-bound. Bridge-bound premise, I'm going to mention, except for when it's the pain one, but more importantly, and then you give them a personalized premise. And then the cold outbound, I would go personalization only. Reason for my outreach is I saw you wrote this article, one line in specific that you can put the language in there and then give them an excerpt. But this is, again, I know this is brief, but this is how I would view it. The dark blue is what you can automate and you don't need a person to do, and you should base a sequence on each different play so you can figure out high level which play is better to run or more effective for your team. If you want to see my actual messaging, again, I'll send out the link that you can take a look. Relevance only strategy. Let's say you're going relevance only, then essentially all of it's dark blue because you have to automate all of it. The inbound premise, it stays the same as personalization because you're one to many no matter what for inbound. It's a true hand raiser. So you just need to get out of the way. Of like, hey, thanks for requesting a demo. Thought you might like this article. Here's my Calendly link or whatever the process is. 2 for postbound, I would say the only difference here is you're going to add a relevance buyer persona. Saw that you attended this content. More importantly, I don't want to talk about me. Notice you're a VP of sales. You can dynamic tag in the title. We work with VPs of sales who X, Y, and Z, and you can put your relevant pitch in there. But if you're not going to do personalization, my plea with you, if anyone on the line, you don't need a person to do this. So my problem with it is not that it necessarily doesn't work, but I could run this playbook without an actual person. So what I need a person for, which I do need people, is there's no way they'll be able to tease out the personalized premise and be able to hook it without that. But if you're going to run this playbook, you can even run them in tandem if you want to. I've seen companies do that. They have like a mock SDR that's not real. And but you get the playbook of postbound of, I noticed you download this content. More importantly, I saw that you're a VP of sales over at Service Titan. We work with VPs of sales who X, Y, and Z. Shout out Ross Bessemer or Beastman if he is, he works at Bessemer if he is watching this from Service Titan. Number 3, bridge-bound premise, but more importantly, and relevance to buyer persona, same as postbound, where you essentially would put one to many premise in here in terms of their buyer persona relevance. We work with VPs of sales who X, Y, and Z. And then number 4, for cold outbound, if you're going to go relevance only, then I would say, hey, reason for my outreach is I noticed you're the VP of sales. No, I don't consider that personalization. And I noticed you're a VP of sales over at Service Titan. Some of the problems that we solve for VPs of sales are X, Y, and Z. Give me a shot Wednesday at 2 to unpack how they leverage, flip the script to drive more meetings, book more deals. If you're not impressed, I'll never blow you up again, or, put my tail between my legs, et cetera. And you get the feel, but essentially I am much less interested in the actual tip, trick, and technique. It's more so what is the play that's working for our team so that we can emulate it in terms of velocity, in terms of attention, in terms of bandwidth of, if common VCs is what's working for me, from the data that I see, then suddenly I'm going to re-rank for my reps of like, that's the one that if we have people in there that we're going to run. So that is close to everything. I'm going to put this up here. Again, you'll have the deck. Most of my sequences are 16 steps over 21 business days, 5 emails, 10 cold calls, a LinkedIn research step at the onset that will take you no longer than 5 minutes to hunt 3 personalized premises. So I am doing a surprise launch on January 1st on, I can't go into the content, but essentially there is a math and a daily workflow that I essentially will go into in January. So you'll have to wait for this surprise launch. I actually filmed the other day, but no longer than 5 minutes to do the research for the 3 personalized premises. Out of the 5 emails, 3 emails are personalized, 2 really aren't. either case scenario, they shouldn't take any longer than 8 minutes. So you'll be able to close to double the activity metric for reps who are going average relevance only in the industry, that it's 40 dials per day. You'll be able to get to 70 or 80 with personalization. So you're not only scaling it, you're scaling it past the relevance crowd. So, but this is the infrastructure for most of the sequences that I run. You know, and again, the hook here is what differs of like, it's a content download, webinar registrant, etc. That's all she wrote.
Incredible, incredible stuff, Becc. Thank you so much. I speak for everyone. There's an insane amount of comments of how valuable this was. So thank you so much. And again, I'm gonna plug you one more time because I know you don't do it yourself. 11 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. If you learned anything, Becc puts so much work into this, and all we ask is you do a super quick LinkedIn post tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific. Throw it on your calendar now and just share 3 things that you learned. We would really, really appreciate it. Becc, final words for this incredible community you've built.
Just thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for showing up and giving me your time and attention. I mean it when I say I was scared to do this. I was scared to do Flip the Script in general, and it's because of the people on this line that I did, and I thank you. Thank you for pushing me and for supporting me and for helping. Again, I can't name the amount of people that went into this being developed in terms of in my career, but certainly recently, you know, Scott being an insatiable one for me. But, you know, without you guys, this is essentially nothing, you know, very little, if close to nothing. So if you have any thoughts, you have any questions, you know, I would love feedback. I always love it. It's how I am building, you know, as people deploying this in the industry. So that is something I can't go without. So please, you know, hit me up over the contact line that you should have the email for. I will be sending out the PDF and the deck, but I'm thrilled to see where this goes, and I can't echo what Scott said enough. More people you can share this with, the better. My only goal is to get this out in front of people so they can systematize it, and we can, you know, change the industry into a game that we can finally win. So thank you everyone for coming and for giving me the pleasure of your time.
Thank you, Becc. Thanks for inviting me. That was a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone.